Today, we're diving into one of the body's more fascinating metabolic messengers, GLP-1. Now, you've probably heard of it thanks to all the media coverage on weight loss drugs like Ozempic. But GLP-1 isn't just about dropping kilos. It plays a critical role in how your body regulates blood sugar, controls your appetite, and digests food. So let's unpack GLP-1 and talk about what exactly it does, why it matters for things like weight gain and metabolic syndrome, and how some of our favourite bitter herbs like ginger, chen, feverfew, wormwood, and gentian can actually help support these same pathways naturally. So let's talk about physiology, phytochemistry, and how you can use plants to support your metabolism. Let's get started, shall we?
You're the one they turn to, the calm one, the capable one, the one with the answers. And yet, beneath it all, you know there's more available for you. More energy, more clarity, more unshakable presence. Welcome to Project Joyful, the podcast for health-centered leaders. I'm Tracy Tutty. Here, we speak to the part of you that knows leadership isn't about doing more. It's about becoming more fully who you are. So let's begin, shall we?
Okay, so let's start with a bit of biology by talking about what GLP-1 is and how it works. So GLP-1 is short for glucagon-like peptide 1. I know it's a mouthful. That's why we call it GLP-1 for short. It's a hormone that's made in your small intestine, specifically by your L cells, and it gets released when you eat, particularly when you're eating fats or carbohydrates. So once it's released, it does a few really helpful things. So it stimulates your pancreas to release insulin, but only when glucose is present. And this helps to lower your blood sugar. It suppresses the release of glucagon, the hormone that raises blood sugar. It slows gastric emptying, which means that food stays in your stomach for longer. So this helps you to feel full for longer. And it signals the brain to reduce appetite. So it plays a key role in what's called the incretin effect, which is a fancy term for how your gut and pancreas talk to each other after you eat. So GLP-1 receptor agonists have been revolutionary for managing type 2 diabetes and for supporting weight loss. But they can come with side effects like nausea, constipation, or a loss of appetite. And that's where bitter herbs become really interesting. Okay, so in case you're thinking a receptor, what now? What is that? Let's start by defining this term receptor agonist. So think of a receptor on a cell like a lock, and a hormone is like the key. So an agonist is a compound that fits into the lock and activates the cell. It mimics the original key. GLP-1 receptor agonists, like those popular injectable medications, are synthetic compounds that mimic the action of the natural GLP-1 hormone. So they bind to the same receptors and they trigger the same effects. So you get increased insulin release, you get reduced appetite, and you get delayed gastric emptying. So why are we so interested in GLP-1, especially now? Well, it's to do mainly with a health condition we call metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is a cluster of risk factors that include high blood pressure, elevated blood sugar, central weight gain, particularly around the abdomen, and abnormal cholesterol levels, such as high triglycerides or low HDL. And that's the good cholesterol, high density. Left unchecked, it increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes, all quite significant health conditions. Now, metabolic syndrome isn't a new thing. It started appearing in medical literature in around the late 20th century, but it reflects a pattern that's becoming increasingly common with modern lifestyles. So rates of metabolic syndrome have skyrocketed over the past few decades due to a mix of factors. Things like a more processed diet, sedentary behavior, poor sleep quality, and most importantly, chronic stress. All of these things impact insulin sensitivity and fat distribution. And there's also a strong hormonal component at play here. So for women, the transition through perimenopause and menopause brings a natural decline in estrogen, and that affects how your body stores fat and regulates glucose. And this is why we often see a shift towards abdominal fat in midlife, even if nothing else has changed. And for men, a gradual decline in testosterone is linked with increased visceral fat and reduced insulin sensitivity. So, for both men and women, these hormonal shifts can tip the scales literally and metabolically, even though you're not doing anything different. It's biology, people. So, supporting GLP-1 naturally means tapping into your body's existing mechanisms to regulate blood sugar and manage your appetite. And it often comes without those harsher side effects. So, bitter herbs have the ability to offer a gentler whole body approach when it comes to managing GLP-1. Because not only can they influence GLP-1, but they can also support your digestion, your liver function, and your nervous system. And this means that you're getting a more holistic effect. So it's not just a single target result. Before we jump into the mechanisms, let's talk about bitter herbs. So, bitter herbs are exactly what they sound like. They're plants with a distinctly bitter taste. And historically, they've been used across cultures as tonics to support digestion, appetite, and vitality. And back in the day, we used to eat more bitter foods than we do now. So, it's something that is reducing in our diet as well. So, bitters were commonly taken before meals to prime the digestive system. You might have heard of the aperitif tradition, for example. So, a bitter herbal drink that's sipped before dinner to stimulate appetite and digestive juices. Now, this ritual isn't just about taste, it also reflects a deep physiological wisdom. Bitter compounds trigger receptors on your tongue, signaling your vagus nerve to prepare your stomach, your liver, and your pancreas for the work of digestion. Herbalists have long used bitters to stimulate in the appetite in convalescence or in fatigue, to support bile flow from the liver, enhance absorption of nutrients, and relieve bloating and sluggish digestion. But there's more. So, bitters were also considered tonics in the truest sense. So, they were used to strengthen the body over time and to help restore balance. So, they're used when vitality is low, when digestion's sluggish, and when that energy felt stuck. And interestingly, not everyone experiences bitter herbs in the same way. And this is partly due to a genetic variation. So our bitter taste perceptions mediated by something called a TAS2R receptor. And these are G protein coupled receptors that are found not just in your mouth, but also in your digestive tract. And there are over 25 known bitter taste receptors in humans, and the genes that code for them vary significantly from person to person. So, what this means is that in practice, some people are genetically more sensitive to bitter compounds. They might find even the smallest amounts of a bitter formula can be quite intense and trigger a stronger physiological response in their body, while other people will barely notice the taste. And I've really noticed this in clinic, that this sensitivity to the bitterness of a bitter herb, it can also change over time. So this isn't just a flavor preference, it reflects how your body interprets and responds to these compounds, these phytochemicals. Now, this variation might also help to explain why certain bitters seem to work better for some people. And if your receptors are highly responsive to a particular compound, the physiological effects like GLP-1 release or increased bile flow might be more pronounced as well. So, this is a great reminder of why herbal medicine isn't a one size fits all. These differences can guide a more personalized herbal choice and dosing strategy, which your medical herbalist is all over. So, let's talk about how bitter herbs can interact with these GLP-1 mechanisms. Now, here's the really exciting bit. Research now shows that we have these bitter taste receptors, those TAS2Rs, not just on your tongue, but throughout your digestive system. So, including your stomach, your small intestine, your pancreas, even your colon. And these receptors detect bitter compounds in a then they trigger a cascade of responses. And when these gut-based receptors are activated by those bitter compounds, then enteroendocrine cells release hormones like GLP-1 and choleocytokinin. Call it CCK. So enteroendocrine is just a fancy term for the hormone-producing cells in the lining of your gut. They're the messengers between your food and your physiology. So they read the chemical cues from your meal, like the presence of bitter compounds, and they respond by secreting hormones that influence digestion, your blood sugar, and your appetite. CCK also slows digestion and it makes you feel full. So while GLP-1 influences insulin secretion and blood sugar control, this is how bitter herbs can help to modulate your appetite and metabolic function. So enough of the science. Let's look at some key herbs in relation to this. So first up, one of my favorites, ginger, Zingiber officinale. Now, this herb is like super versatile. Think of this herb as your like go-to digestive ally. Ginger's warming, it's aromatic, and it's slightly bitter. It's traditionally used to relieve nausea, bloating, and a sluggish digestion, but it's also able to stimulate circulation as well. Pharmacologically, it's got these gingerols and shigals. These are the more active constituents that researchers have isolated, and they've been found to increase GLP-1 secretion in animal studies. Now, one study demonstrated that 6-gingerol increased GLP-1 levels by activating the TRPA1 channel on enteroendocrine cells. So ginger also has anti-inflammatory, carminative, if you're prone to gas and bloating, and prokinetic effects, which means that it helps to move things along the digestive tract. And it's particularly helpful for people who have slow motility. So they're prone to constipation because the food substances aren't moving through the colon as quickly as they could. And they typically feel heavy after eating. So my favourite way to take ginger, as you know, if we've been chatting for a while, it's to blitz up some fresh ginger root in a blender. I like my NutriBullet. Strain it through a sieve and freeze it into ice cube trays. And then I add 1 or 2 of those ginger ice cubes to a mug of boiling water, and voila, I have instant fresh ginger tea. Okay, so let's talk about chen pea, which is Citrus reticulata peel. So chen pea, or aged tangerine peel, is a classic herb in traditional Chinese medicine. It's traditionally used to regulate qi, it resolves phlegm, and it supports digestion. And it's particularly good at addressing bloating, belching, and that stuck feeling after meals. Think of it in terms of movement. So chen pea also contains flavonoids like hesperidin and naringin, which are bitter and aromatic. And these compounds in particular stimulate your bitter receptors and promote bile flow, enzyme secretion, and they improve gastrointestinal motility, so moving things along. In the case of chen pea, its major active constituents are flavonoids, for example, that hesperidin and naringin, and these polymethioxylated flavones like nobeletin and tangeritin. So what researchers believe happens is that those bitter flavonoid molecules travel through your gut lumen, and when they come into contact with the lining of the small intestine, they bind to bitter taste receptors, those TAS2Rs. These are expressed on those enteroendocrine cells. So these cells are the hormone-releasing sensors in your gut lining. So binding of a bitter ligand, such as a citrus flavonoid, to that TAS2R receptor triggers a downstream intracellular signaling cascade. And it often involves a G protein, often like gusteucin or something similar to that. It activates phospholipase C, and it releases intracellular calcium as the second messenger. And that calcium rise prompts the vesicles in those enteroendocrine cells to release hormones like GLP-1 and CCK into the bloodstream or local circulation. Phew, that's a lot of science, isn't it? Anyway, once GLP-1 and CCK are released, then GLP-1 acts on the pancreatic beta cells to increase insulin in the presence of glucose. It also slows gastric emptying and it reduces your appetite. while CCK promotes that satiety and it slows intestinal transit. In many of the animal and cell models, the bitter-induced release of GLP-1 and CCK is attenuated if bitter receptor signaling is blocked or inhibited. So that's the sciencey bit, but the thing that you really need to remember if all of that biology and chemistry isn't really a thing is that, in other words, the flavonoids in chen act as keys to turn on gut locks, those bitter receptors that send a signal to your body that the food has arrived. And part of that signal is releasing hormones like the GLP-1 and the CCK to manage digestion and appetite. Because those receptors are spread throughout your gut. The effect isn't limited to just your tongue. So it's a deeper entero-level signal. Okay, let's talk about a different herb now, feverfew, Tanacetum parthenium. Now, this herb is a potent anti-inflammatory, particularly used if you're prone to migraines. It contains these secreterpene lactones, especially parthenolide, which helps to modulate inflammatory signaling pathways, including prostaglandin synthesis and NF-kappa B activity. So that's like the pain-relieving anti-inflammatory part. Now, traditionally, feverfew is taken for headaches, fevers, arthritis, and digestive discomfort. And it's commonly used by chewing 1 or 2 fresh flower heads or leaves. But be careful with this because some people find it irritates their mouth. It's also quite a bitter way to take the herb. So give it a go if you're curious. And it's a really easy, low-cost way to access feverfew because as any gardener knows, once that feverfew is growing in your garden, it is everywhere. Now, in the digestive system, feverfew offers a gentle bitter stimulation alongside that antispasmodic and anti-inflammatory action. This is really important if you are prone to IBS or you get that gut discomfort. Have a look at feverfew because it can help to ease that bloating, that cramping, or that sluggish digestion, particularly where inflammation is playing a role in that. Now, this phytochemical parthenolide has been shown to inhibit pro-inflammatory cytokines and suppress calcium influx in inflammatory cells. Its bitter profile also stimulates, you got it, the TAS2R receptors in your gut. So it's potentially supporting GLP-1 and CCK release, although researchers are still exploring this particular link. Now, as I said, feverfew can irritate the mouth, so just be careful if you're taking it as those few heads fresh and chewing on them. And also use this with caution or under the supervision of a medical herbalist if you're on anticoagulants or anti-inflammatories, and avoid it during pregnancy and breastfeeding. Okay, now let's talk about one of the more fashionable herbs of the cocktail world, wormwood, Artemisia absinthium. Wormwood's one of our more potent bitters. This one's stronger. And its main active components, especially the absinthin, are intensely bitter. So it makes it a powerful stimulator of those digestive secretions, the bile flow, and your overall digestive tone. Now, traditionally, wormwood's been used to support the appetite, to ease bloating, and to address liver and gallbladder sluggishness. It's also known for its historical use in addressing intestinal parasites, which is why it gets its name wormwood. In the modern clinic, wormwood can be especially helpful for people with signs of digestive stagnation, so a heavy or full feeling after meals, or they're prone to gas, particularly the flatulence, so the downward moving one, or irregular bowel motions. It's also useful in formulas where we want to strengthen that digestive fire and support detoxification. So, wormwood's bitter sesquiterpene lactones stimulate bitter receptors throughout the digestive tract. So, similar to the other herbs, right? And this in turn supports that release of the digestive hormones like GLP-1, and it promotes that healthy motility, that enzyme secretion, and the bile production. And some studies are also pointing to its gastroprotective and anti-inflammatory effects in your gut lining. Now, the thing with wormwood, as with any strong bitter, dose and context matter. Wormwood's best used short term or in cycles, and don't use it during pregnancy. It's not a herb to throw into every formula, but for the right person, it's amazingly effective, and it's often the one that opens things up. Let's talk about my final herb. This one is my favorite bitter herb, gentian, Gentiana lutea. It's strong, it's direct, and it gets things moving. Now, it's traditionally used to wake up digestion, to support energy and recovery, and to prepare the body for nourishment. It's been a staple in herbal medicine for centuries, and I've also noticed that when my patients are taking it, they tend to naturally choose what we would call healthier food options as well, which I find really fascinating. So this isn't a herb that you need a lot of because it's incredibly bitter. Just a drop or two of the tincture is enough to activate your digestive reflexes. And that bitterness isn't just a flavor, that's the signal, right? Your body reads it as a cue to get ready. More saliva, more stomach acid, more enzyme and bile flow. And from a clinical perspective, gentian is especially useful when you've got fatigue with digestion, when meals feel like they sit heavily, when the appetite's low after illness or stress. It's also one of the most reliable herbs for stimulating gastric secretions and enhancing nutrient absorption. Now, gentian's got some fabulous secoiridoid glycosides like gentiopicroside and amarogentian. And amarogentian is one of the most bitter substances that we know of. These are the compounds that activate the TAS2R bitter receptors throughout the gut. And this triggers that cascade that includes that vagal nerve stimulation that enhances those gastric secretions. And as some studies are now showing, it's releasing the hormones like GLP-1. Now, even in capsule form, gentian has been shown to activate these digestive pathways. Because remember, these receptors aren't just in the mouth, they're in the GI tract as well. Now, gentian's one of those herbs that's generally well tolerated, although it does taste quite bitter. So that intensity means that you want to start low and go slow, especially in people who have ulcers or excess stomach acid. See a herbalist in that case. But as with most bitters, it's not one to be used during pregnancy. And so I like to start with low doses in people who are feeling depleted or have depleted constitutions. When I think about bitters, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a fan. What I love most about them is that they don't override your physiology. They work with it. Instead of pushing through one specific symptom, they invite your body back into that relationship with itself. And that's the difference between a reductionist and a holistic frame of reference. And it's what makes working with herbs so rewarding. They support systems, not just symptoms or signals. If you've enjoyed exploring these bitter allies and you're curious about how herbs can support your everyday well-being without that supplement aisle overwhelm, come join me in Herbs for Health. It's a free monthly email where I share one simple, accessible herb and how it can support your sleep, your stress, your mood, or your immunity. It's bite-sized and it's practical. You can sign up at tracykutty.co.nz/herbs for health. I'll put the link down below. And in case you're wondering which of these herbs is for you, here's a fun flavour snapshot. Scientists often rate bitterness using quinine, that compound in tonic water. They use that as the baseline. So it's scored as 1.0 on the bitterness index. And here's how our featured herbs compare with, I've tucked in a few familiar foods just for context. Okay, so quinine is 1.0. Gentian root, remember I said that's one of the most bitter herbs that we use in practice because of that amarogentian? Well, it's rated between 5 and 20. Wormwood, because of that absinthin that delivers that punchy, bitter taste that wakes up everything, it's rated between 3 and 10 on that bitterness scale. Chimpy, that tangerine peel, that beautiful, gentle, citrusy, aromatic bitter. It's rated 1.5 through to 4 on the bitterness scale. Feverfew, just tucked under 1.2 to 3. It's a bit milder, but it still is pretty potent, especially in fresh form. And ginger, 1 to 2 on that bitterness scale. It's warming and it's just got that mild bitter edge to it, so it's balanced and easy to take. And in case you're curious, white grapefruit, it's rated 0.9 to 1.3, mainly because of that pith. Green olives, when they're raw, 1.5 to 2.5 on that bitterness score. They're extremely bitter before curing, but because of a whole variety of reasons, very few people are eating them in that raw state. And tonic water, of course, our baseline with that quinine, 1.0. Now, this index is based on sensory as well as pharmacological data. So that's why you've got that range of scores, because it's different based on the extract that they're measuring and also individual sensitivity, right? Because some people taste bitters more bitterly than other people. But I think it's a bit of fun. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I'm looking forward to hearing about your journey with bitter herbs. Take care and we'll speak soon. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for listening to today's podcast. Can I ask you a favour? If our conversation spoke to you today, could you please take a moment to leave a 5-star review? Your review will help people discover this podcast, and together we can create a world where there's even more love and more laughter. And if you want to hear more from the Project Joyful podcast, just click the subscribe button. Bye for now.